Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavatir Naishtiki Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Second, thank you for joining. We'll resume our discussion from the fourth canto, chapter 8, verse 15. So this is the part where Dhruva, when he was trying to get onto the lap of his father Uttanpad, so he had noticed his brother Uttam, his younger brother Uttam, was playing on the lap of his father. And at that time, he tried to get onto the lap. And Maharaj Uttanpad, he was observing him. So he was not encouraging him, and he was not pushing him away. But then his stepmother, Suruchi, she speaks with pride and envy. And essentially, she condemns the birth of Dhruva, saying that because you have not taken birth from my womb, you are not qualified to sit on the lap of your father. And the only way that you can do so is by giving up your body, praying to Lord Vishnu that you may get another birth from my womb, then you will be qualified to sit. And while all this is happening, Dhruva sees that his father is doing nothing to either placate him or to stop his wife. So in great anger, Maitreya said, hissing like a snake, Dhruva leaves the palace of his father and heads to the palace of his mother, Suniti. So we'll resume from 4.8.15. Tam nishasvasvantam spuritadharoshatam sunitirutsanga uduhaya balam nishamya tatpaura mukhan nitantam sa vivyatheya gaditam sapatnaya. When Dhruva Maharaj reached his mother, his lips were trembling in anger, and he was crying very grievously. Queen Suniti immediately lifted her son onto her lap, while the palace residents, who had heard all the harsh words of Suruchi, related everything in detail. Thus Suniti also became greatly aggrieved. So we see that Dhruva, not getting any shelter from his father, goes to his other shelter, his mother. And his state is described as Adhar Oshtam. That Adhar Oshtam means his upper and lower lips were spurit. They were trembling. So he was denied the lap of his father. And the first thing that Suniti does is picking him up and put him on her own lap, Utsange. She immediately lifted her son onto her lap. And the news of how he was treated had already been conveyed to Suniti. by the residents of the palace. So Dhruva was not in a position to speak, but Suniti was appraised of what had happened by the other residents of the palace. So hearing how her son had been insulted, Suniti herself began to cry. So in the Bhagavatam, we have the incident of Chitraketu Maharaj, who had 1 crore wives. And when his eldest wife, Kritadyuti, had a son, at that time he neglected all his other wives. And then the wives became so aggrieved because of the neglect that they conspired and poisoned the small child. So because of the benediction, he had got a small, after, he had gotten a child, what was the name of the Shok, right? He said the name of the child would be Shok, that would give you happiness, Harsha Shoka, that he would give you happiness and distress. So Suniti had a much different position, that she had also a son. She had given Maharaj Uttanpad the heir to the throne. She had a son, and like Suruchi, she was also young and very beautiful, as we'll see in the later verses. But yet she was being neglected by her husband. Unlike the wives of Chitraketu, however, we'll see that Suniti, she does not manifest any anger or any envy towards her husband or towards Suruchi, her Sapatneya. And the exalted character of Suniti is being painted in the background. So Maitreya does not speak about it explicitly, but he allows the reader to derive it by inference. So both by the words and actions, we will see the highly exalted character of Suniti. As I mentioned that in the Agni Puran, it is mentioned that Suniti is the daughter of Dharma. She is also known as Sumrita. Okay, let's do the next verse, 16. Chatsrajya dharyam vilapasho davagnina davalateva balam vakyam sapatanya smriti saroj shriyadarshabaspa kalam uvaha. The incident was unbearable to Suniti's patience. She began to burn as if in a forest fire. And in her grief, she became just like a burnt leaf and so lamented. As she remembered the words of her co-wife, her bright lotus-like face filled with tears, and thus she spoke. So Srila Prabhupada said that when a man is aggrieved, he feels exactly like a burnt leaf in a forest fire. Suniti's position was like that. Although her face was as beautiful as a lotus flower, it dried up because of the burning caused by the harsh words of her co-wife. So far, Suniti was silently tolerating all the insult that Uttanpad was directing towards her. So the fact that he was completely neglecting her as a queen and as a wife was insulting. But Suniti was silently tolerating it. Now, however, she sees that her son is also being insulted. And sa utsrijaya dhairyam. So dhairyam means her patience. So utsrijaya means that now she gave up her patience and vilap, and she begins to lament. So vilap actually describes the state when one is crying and speaking at the same time. When one cries without speaking, it is known as rudan. But when one is simultaneously crying and speaking, that is known as vilap. That's why vilap is often translated as lamenting, also accompanied by tears. So her situation is compared to a tender creeper burning in a forest fire. Shoka dav agnya, and that is very graphic. So as the fire approaches the creeper, because of the heat, it first begins to dry up. Then it begins to shrivel, and then ultimately it burns and becomes ashes. And we see the same thing happen to Suniti. As the realization of what happened to her son and to herself, and the conduct of the king and her co-wife dawns more and more upon her, she begins to lament more and more. And the final cause of lamentation is Vakyam Sapatnya Smriti. So Sapatnya is co-wife, points to Suruchi, and Vakyam Smriti, that remembering the words of the co-wife. So that's the power of words, that they live forever in the memory of the other person. Smriti. That if somebody speaks insulting words, then the exchange is not just limited to that interaction, but the other person will carry those words in the mind and relive them over and over again. So that is why words are considered to be very potent, that they magnify themselves in the smriti, in the meditation of the other person. And the person not just suffers pain at the time of the exchange, but every time, Vakyam Smriti, every time the person thinks of the words, then suffers more and more pain. And that's the situation of Suniti, that as she is thinking more and more of what Suruchi spoke to her son, she is suffering more and more pain. And the result of that is Sarojashriya, Vaspakalam, that her lotus-like face is, Vaspakalam is filled with tears. So we see that Maitreyi here is describing her as extremely beautiful. So the comparison with lotus is generally reserved for the Supreme Lord, or for one who has that kind of opulence, that of beauty. So he's saying that she is Sarojashriya, and he refers to her as Bala, that she is young. So if you look at Suniti, that she comes from a very exalted lineage, being the daughter of Dharma. She is extremely beautiful. She is youthful. Yet she is being neglected by her husband. In the third canto, we had seen the situation of Devahuti. That when Devahuti was serving her husband Kardam, then because of the austerities, she had actually become very unattractive. That her body was emaciated, her hair had actually gone gray, her face had shriveled. Yet she was extremely happy. Why? Because she was connected completely to her husband. Similarly, we see in the case of Sita Devi, that when she was living in the forest, then she actually appreciates the situation because she has the exclusive attention of Lord Ram. So that's the nature of a chaste wife, that she will derive lot of pleasure from the attentiveness of her husband. And conversely, even though she may have all opulences. So we see here that Suniti is living in a palace. So as a queen, so she has all opulences. But yet, she is dhairyam. She is patiently suffering from the neglect of her husband. So this verse talks about the pain of Suniti, talks about her youthfulness, talks about her beauty, and also talks about her patience. So sign of advancement is not being stoic to pain, because one might say that we see that Suniti is crying and lamenting over here. So not reacting or not having emotions is not a sign of advancement. In fact, manifesting emotions means that one has a soft heart. So we can understand that Suniti had a soft heart, and she was reacting like a mother and a wife. But her consciousness did not get contaminated. That is the sign of greatness, that one is able to experience the emotions for what they are, but one doesn't let them cloud one's consciousness or understanding. Verse 17. Dirgam swasanti vrijanasya param apashati balakam aha bala mamaglam tat pareshu mamstha bhaunte janoyat paradukhadasta. She also was breathing very heavily, and she did not know the factual remedy for the painful situation. Not finding any remedy, she said to her mother, "My dear son, don't wish for anything inauspicious for others. Anyone who inflicts pain upon others suffers himself from that pain." So from this verse 17, for the next 7 verses, we will see the instructions of the instructions of Suniti to Dhruva Maharaj. So this verse describes a distress, that Dirgham Swashanti, that she was also, Prabhupada said, she was also breathing heavily to indicate one of two things, that Dhruva was breathing heavily and she was also breathing heavily, or that in the previous verse it was mentioned that she was lamenting, and then while she was lamenting she was also breathing heavily. And her frustration at being unable to resolve the misery of the son. So Vrijanasya param apashanti. So Suniti realizes that as a wife who is no longer in the favor of her husband, she had very little opportunity to correct the wrong, specifically when it was committed by Suruchi. It was committed by the favored wife. So thus in that mood, so Maitreya says, Bala Balakam. Bala refers to Suniti, and Balakam refers to Dhruva. So Bala, the young lady, spoke to Balakam, the small child. Excuse me, the small child. So Apashanti. So even though she does not see a way to provide a solution to the problem, but she is giving Dhruva a way by which he could solve the problem. So the second half of the verse shows her maturity. Her first counsel to Dhruva is, do not wish anything bad for Suruchi. So here we see the difference between the reflexive reactions of various personalities. Right? So reflexive reaction means that how does one react spontaneously when the situation suddenly manifests itself. So when Dhruva was getting onto the lap of Uttanpad, then how did Suruchi react? She became consumed by anger and envy, and she began to speak harshly to him. How did Maharaj Uttanpad react? That consumed by his lust for his wife, he was immobilized. And how does Suniti react? That she displays forbearance. So we see the difference in the qualities of these personalities. So in the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks about how the consciousness at the time of death determines the next body. Now the consciousness at the time of the death is reflexive consciousness. It cannot be one that can be assumed at that time. It is the spontaneous consciousness that comes under extreme distress. So that is why one practices the entire life to develop Krishna consciousness. So here we see how the personalities, because of their intrinsic nature, are spontaneously reacting differently to extreme situations. So the first instruction that comes from the mouth of Suniti in this distressful situation is be tolerant. So it reflects a lot on the maturity and faith in Krishna for a person to manifest such a reaction. So Suniti speaks about the law of karma. So she says, Ma amangalam. So ma means never, do not. Amangalam is do not wish bad for others. Why? Bhunkte jano. Bhunkte jano means that a person will also suffer if yat para dukhadas, if he desires to inflict pain on others. This is the law of karma. Now, this was Satyug, where even desiring is as good as acting. In Kali Yuga, it's a little different. That thoughts do not result in any reactions, or at least bad thoughts do not result in any negative reaction. Good thoughts result in positive reactions. But in Satyug, bad thoughts would result in reaction. So Suniti immediately admonishes Dhruva. He could see that Dhruva was angry. In the verse 14, he is described as Swashan Rupa, that he's breathing heavily or hissing like Yathahi, like a snake that has been beaten by a stick. Dandahatu. So, seeing his anger, she immediately cautions him that do not think or speak badly about Suruchi, as that will cause your own suffering. Now, one may say that the same words could also be applied to Suruchi, who had spoken and acted harshly towards Dhruva. So Dhruva might say that you're asking me to not speak badly about Suruchi, but Suruchi spoke badly about me. But Suniti has a different mood. She is saying that does not matter what others do. So thinking because the other person has acted badly, you act badly, does not negate the bad reaction. Both of you will suffer. So let Suruchi bear the consequences of her own action, but you should be responsible for your own. So she says, Ma Mangalam Tat. Tat is affectionate term for my dear son. So she says, therefore, do not wish for anything bad. There is no need for you to implicate yourself in any way. So, in a way, if you remember, when this is in the previous chapter, when Brahma was praying to Lord Shiva to forgive Daksha and the offending devas, he had said that my dear Lord Shiva, you don't have to punish them because they're already being punished by the law of. He had said that great personalities like you, understanding this, do not punish them, but rather display mercy towards them. Suniti is taking even a higher platform. She is saying that you don't even think that Suruchi will be punished because of her own actions. So, different levels of reactions. One is a person does bad to you and you reciprocate by doing bad to the person. That's considered to be the lowest level of reaction. Second is the person does bad to you and you don't respond to the person, expecting the law of karma to punish that person. Right? That's the mentality that Brahma was displaying when he was trying to assure Lord Shiva. It is higher than the previous level, where the person himself punishes. Here the person does not punish, but still the person has an expectation that this offending person will suffer. Suniti is actually going to an even higher level, saying that don't even think like that Suruchi will be punished because of her action. So for one to wish good for those who have wronged is the highest form of forgiveness. And we see that Suniti is displaying that reflexively, spontaneously, not after prolonged meditation or introspection. This shows her exalted nature. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur summarizes the mood of Suniti. Do not find fault in your stepmother. You have experienced the results of sins you have committed in previous births. Since the person who gives suffering to others in a previous life receives it back in this life. So Dhruva might ask that if I do not blame Suruchi, then how do I reconcile this suffering that I am experiencing? So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that Suniti is indicating that there's only one person responsible for your suffering, and that is you yourself. So because of your own karma, Dhruva might say, I'm only 5 years old, what karma I have? Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad says that previous lives. Not necessarily that one is only suffering the karmic reaction in this life. The previous lives, whatever an activity, good and bad, one is doing, one is suffering the results of it. The others are simply instruments that are fructifying the results of those karma. And this is actually the message of the Bhagavatam also, right in the first canto, first chapter, when it is said, Trapa Triyon Moolam, that the Bhagavatam is meant to uproot the threefold miseries of material life. So how does the Bhagavatam uproot it? It does not make the miseries of the material world go away, because that's the intrinsic nature of the material world by default. It is the cause of suffering. But it makes the person immune to the suffering. Right? It's like if one is in an area where the diseases are spread, but one has the proper vaccination, then it's as good as the disease not being there. So that's what the Bhagavatam does, that it empowers one to understand the philosophical basis of the suffering and therefore not suffer. So we see that a personality as exalted as Suniti, she is the daughter-in-law of Swambhavu Manu. She is the king, she is the wife, the queen of Maharaj Uttanapad. She is the daughter of Dharma. She is suffering. So what to speak of others? So suffering is intrinsic in the material world, and that's where the Bhagavatam comes. It does not give a means to maintain an elevated material opulence. It does not give a means to magically make the sufferings go away, but it creates a shield that enables the person to not be impacted by it. So we also can contrast the nature of Suniti with her husband. That Uttanapad did not protect Dhruva, did not console him, and did not control Suruchi. So ideally speaking, he was in a position to do all three of them. He was a king, he was a husband, and he was a father. So as a king, he should have protected Dhruva, because a king protects the Jana. So he should have protected the citizen. Even if Dhruva was not his son, if he was being ill-treated, it's the duty of the king to protect. So as a king, he should have protected. Then as a father, he should have consoled and loved Dhruva. So when he saw that Dhruva was crying, he should have immediately consoled him. And he should have immediately displayed affection towards him. And as a husband, it was his duty to control Suruchi. Because a husband gets half the reaction of any impious activities done by the wife. Just like the wife gets half the reaction of any pious activities done by the husband gets half the reaction of the pious activities, the impious activities done by the wife. So the duty of the husband is considered as one of the gurus of the wife. The duty of the husband is to guide the wife properly. So he could see that Suruchi was acting improperly, but he did not speak. So he failed in all three roles. He failed as a king, he failed as a husband, and he failed as a father. And that was because he was improperly situated. Because he was situated on a platform of lust. He was lusty and he was attached to his wife in that mood. So the message is that if one is not properly situated, one is not able to do their duty in any way or form. So not that he was helping Suruchi. He was not. Because by speaking in this way, Suruchi was creating adverse reactions for herself in the future. As a husband, it was his duty to correct it. So he was not helping her, and he was definitely not executing his duty as a father and a king, because he was improperly situated. Now, on the other hand, Suniti, she is disempowered. She is deprived of all power. She's a neglected wife. She is a delegated queen. She's a powerless woman. and she's an aggrieved mother. So in all these roles, she is without any empowerment. Yet, she does the right thing. So this shows that by being properly situated, even if the circumstances are adverse, one can do the right thing. So one does not have to be in a position of power, or one does not have to be in a position of support to do the right thing. And contrasting the position of Uttanpad and Suniti, that becomes clear. Uttanpad had everything. He was the most powerful person. He was the emperor. But because he was not properly situated, he could not do the right thing. Suniti had nothing. But because she was properly situated, she does the right thing. Okay, moving on. Verse 18. Satyam suruchabhitam bhavan me yadurbhagya udare grihita stanyena vradascha viljateyam bharyati vavodham idaspatirmam. Suniti said, "My dear boy, whatever has been spoken by Suruchi is so, because the king, your father, does not consider me his wife or even his maidservant. He feels ashamed to accept me. Therefore, it is a fact that you have taken birth from the womb of an unfortunate woman, and by being fed from her breasts, you have grown up." So this verse actually shows the dangers of fault finding. So previously, Suniti had cautioned Dhruva against wishing bad for one who has wronged him because of two reasons. Firstly, she said that everyone is suffering the results of their own actions. And secondly, she said that if you think bad about others, bad thing will happen to you. Now, she gives one more reason, that there is no reason to be angry at Suruchi because she has spoken the truth. So Suruchi had condemned the birth of Dhruva from the womb of Suniti, right? Because indirectly, she had said that because you have not taken birth from me, you're not qualified. So indirectly, she was condemning the birth of Dhruva from the womb of Suniti, which had angered Dhruva. Now his mother is saying that actually what she said was right. Satyam Suruchya Abhitam Bhavan me. That whatever she has said to you about me, Satyam Suruchya, is absolutely true. That I am very unfortunate that the king, so Idapati, that the king does not accept me as Bharyate, as a wife, or even she says Vadasi, or even as a maidservant. So in fact, she says that Vilijate, that he is ashamed to even acknowledge me. So Dhruva may ask, what is the reason for it? She says, Durbhagya, that it is my misfortune only. So here again we see that Suniti is not blaming Maharaj Uttanpad or Suruchi. So she's not saying that your father is lusty or your father is deranged. She's not saying that Suruchi is a seductress and she has poisoned his ear against me. She could have said all that thing, but she says no, Durbhagya, that only because of my misfortune. So she is saying that I am married to a great man, right? So she says Idapati, that he's the protector of everyone. He's the emperor. I'm married to a great man. I'm fortunate to to give him a qualified son. But only because of my own sinful activities in my previous life, I am suffering from the neglect of my husband. So we see here that Suniti is practicing what she is preaching. That she's not saying to Dhruva that you act in a way, that you treat your misfortune as a reaction to your karma, and don't speak bad about others. But she's demonstrating that she herself acts like that. She's also in an unfortunate situation. She's not blaming anybody else, not blaming Maharaj Uttanpad, not blaming Suruchi, but just like she had told Dhruva, she's also demonstrating that same quality, saying that I'm the only one who is responsible for it. There is no other reason. So we see that even though Suniti has no ability to help Dhruva, yet she is trying to help. And Maharaj Uttanpad had the power to completely help him, but yet he did not act. So the difference between the two, again, because one is properly situated and one is not. Right? When Srila Prabhupada came then to the US, then he was in no position to do anything. He was in a foreign country, no money, bad health, and no resources. And yet he helped so much because he was properly situated. So one can only help oneself and others if one is properly situated. Maharaj Uttanpad, he was so powerful, not able to help because improperly situated. So what is the counsel that Suniti is giving? That you should accept the fact that udare grihita. So we see that when Suruchi was chastising Dhruva, she said, Mam kukshe, that you are not born from my belly. Suniti says udare, womb. It's a more intimate term because she is a biological mother. So she's using the more intimate term. Udare means actually womb. So she says that udare grihita, because you're born from my womb, you should know that it is the result of your past sinful activities. So this this ability to establish the chain of causation is a sign of being conversant with the Vedas. A person who is not conversant with the Vedas will only look at the immediate cause. That one person steps on my feet, so he steps on the feet of that person. That's the immediate cause, that he stepped on my feet and that's how he reacts. In the first canto, if you remember, when Parishad Maharaj sees the personality of Kali beating Dharma, and then he asks him, who is in the form of bull, that what is the source of your suffering? And then Dharma, he does not turn and point to Kali, because anybody else would see there is this man with the club who's beating the feet, the legs of the bull. That's the cause of the suffering. But Dharma does not, excuse me, but Dharma does not do that. He actually says that I'm actually unable to discern that my suffering is because of my karma, because of my swabhav, is because of the Lord, is because of the planetary positions, is because of the soul, is because of prakriti, or it is ahituki, or it is without cause. So he said there are so many causes of suffering, but I'm not able to discern it, so you please tell me. And then Parishad Maharaj immediately says that you are undoubtedly Dharma appearing as a bull. So one who is well versed in the scriptural knowledge sees through the eyes of the scriptures. Just like Dharma was seeing at that time, we see that Suniti is seeing through the eyes of the scriptures. She does not want to criticize Suruchi because she does not want to get implicated. Similarly, she does not want Dhruva to indulge in her criticism. So she acknowledges that I'm suffering because I'm Durbhagya, because it's my misfortune, and you're suffering because you took birth from my womb. So that is your misfortune. Then she says, your further misfortune is Stanena Vridhas. Stanena Vridhas, your further misfortune is that you're nourished by the milk of my breasts. So this is indirectly Suniti is saying that your further misfortune is that you have grown up without experiencing the love of your father. So the only nourishment that you have received is the mother's milk. So the point that Suniti is making, that your misfortune does not end at simply taking birth from my womb, but it continues to haunt you. And you have already experienced that. Stanena Vridhas, that only nourished by my milk. When a child grows, then is nourished by the affection of the father and the milk of the mother. But Dhruva has not experienced the affection of his father, only the milk of his mother. So she is indicating that not only is she neglected by her husband, but because of Dhruva's connection to her, he is also neglected by the father. Okay, so I'll do one more verse, and it's a logical stop. It has a little bit over time, and then we can stop for discussion. Verse 19. Atishtatat vimatsarastvam uktam samatrapi yadavilikam aradya doksaja padpadmam yadechase dhyashanam uttamayatha. My dear boy, whatever has been spoken by Suruchi, your stepmother, although very harsh to hear, is factual. Therefore, if you desire at all to sit on the same throne as your stepbrother Uttam, then give up your envious attitude and immediately try to execute the instructions of your stepmother. Without further delay, you must engage yourself in worshipping the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So earlier Suniti had asked Dhruva not to take offense of the envious words of Suruchi. Now she is going further and saying that not only should you give up the envious attitude, she says the Vimatsaras, not only you should give up the envious attitude, but Atista, but you become determined to follow her instructions. So she is glorifying the instructions of Suniti. She says they are avilikam, that they are factual and non-duplicitous. So Dhruva might say that my mother is envious of me. So she may say something that might mislead me. So Suniti is saying no, they are avilikam, that they are factual, they are non-duplicitous. And he needs to execute upon them. And Dhruva might say, so what do you want me to do? Suniti said, Aradhya Dhoksha Pada Padma, that worship the lotus feet of Krishna. So she glorifies, in this verse, she glorifies Suruchi as Samatra. So Samatra means that woman who is just like your mother. Matra is mother, and so is just like your mother. So she is saying, don't just think of me as your mother. Think of Suruchi also as your mother. Earlier on, what we had seen that Suruchi was chastising Dhruva that you're not my son. Don't think of me as your mother. Suniti is saying the opposite. That think of Suruchi as your mother and follow her instruction. So we see that Suniti is distilling content from the container. Right? The container is that these instructions were given by Suruchi in anger, envy, and pride. She has spoken them in an attempt to insult and humiliate Dhruva and Suniti. And spoken by a person who was not very well qualified, who had a bad consciousness, and who had a vested interest. Suruchi did not want Dhruva to sit on the throne because she wanted her son to sit on the throne. Suniti is saying you neglect all of that. So neglect the container, but only look at the content. What is the message that Suruchi has given you? The message is that she told you, worship the Supreme Lord. Take that message and follow on it with determination. Athistha. So in the 10th canto, when Putna came to give poison to Krishna, he accepted the fact that she came pretending to be a mother. So she was dressed like a mother. She picked him up like a mother. She tried to feed him like a mother. So she accepted the fact. Sukdev Goswami says that she came like a hidden sword in a velvet sheath. So the velvet sheath externally is very soft and pleasing, but the sword within it is very sharp. So Krishna, he neglected the attitude, but accepted he accepted the external form. That she is trying to be my mother, so let me try and be her son. So in the Brahma Samhita, it is said that great yogis travel for millions of years with their mind and they're not able to catch Krishna. But yet we see here Krishna holding tight onto Putana. Putana is actually trying to get away from Krishna. She says, Munchati, Munchati, leave me child. But Krishna, his affection is so strong that he firmly holds on to the glimmer of good quality that he sees her, even when she herself is trying to distance herself. And with firm determination, Krishna holds on to it. Suniti is giving the same message, that neglect everything that is external, but hold on to the essence of the message. So in Niti Shastra, Chanakya Pandit says that one should extract poison from nectar. Then one should, if one gets, one can take gold from a filthy place, and one can receive the highest knowledge from a Shudra, and one can accept a well-qualified girl as a wife, even if she's born in a disreputable family. So the same mood of Bhavagrahi, of extracting the essence. So why does Suniti say in the verse that if you desire to sit on the same throne as your stepbrother, you should worship Krishna? That seems to be contrary to the exalted mood that Suniti was displaying so far, because materialistic results. And Acharya is saying that Suniti, and this is the mood of a preacher, that understanding that Dhruva at this point is only interested in immediate tangible gains. Same thing Narad Muni will do later on. He'll say, okay, you want a position higher than Brahma, then do this. And he does not say that don't do this and this is all material and all that, because Dhruva is not willing to listen. He tried to do that and Dhruva rejected it. So, so the preacher also preaches in this way. that it engages with the person at the level they are and then elevates. So Suniti is saying you worship Krishna, and that will allow you to share the lap of your father with Uttama. And here again, we see the exalted nature of Suniti. She is not saying that you will sit on the lap of your father instead of Uttama. She is saying that along with Uttama. Adya Ashanam Uttamo Yatha. Along with Uttam, you will see. So Suruchi had a divisive nature. She was saying, my son or no one else. Suniti, she had an inclusive nature. She is saying that if you do this, then don't come back and say that now this lap is exclusively mine, but along with your brother, you can sit on the lap of your father. Srila Prabhupada says that the harsh words spoken by Suruchi to her stepson were true because unless one is favored by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one cannot achieve any success in life. So that is why Suruchi is considered to be the path Pradakshan Guru. Even though she did it unknowingly, but nevertheless, she did give instructions to Dhruva that were used by Suniti to show the path to Dhruva. In this verse, Suniti refers to Krishna as Adhoksaja. And Adhoksaja, as we know, is as one who is beyond the senses. So she's addressing Dhruva's future meditation, that with the current senses that you have, you will not be able to see the Lord. But by following the path of Bhakti, Adhoksaja, one who is beyond the senses, will become visible to you. Okay, so this concludes Suniti's, and doesn't conclude it, but these are the four verses in which we see four different emotions that are handled by Suniti. So in verse 16, the emotion is that of anger. So it's described that the incident was unbearable to Suniti. Then in verse 17, the emotion is survival. That do not wish bad for her because it will implicate you. In verse 18, it is acceptance, where Suniti says that only because of past karma, one is suffering. And in verse 19, the emotion is learning. That you should do what your stepmother says. So anger, survival, acceptance, and learning are considered to be the different stages of handling grief. And we see Suniti going through the stages. That first the incident is unbearable to Suniti. It indicates some anger in her. Then immediately she says that to Dhruva, don't wish bad for her because bad will happen to you. That is survival. That don't threaten your own survival by thinking bad of her. Then acceptance. That just think that everything that is happening to you is because of you only. And then finally learning. That what can you do to make the most of this situation? And that's when she extracts the instructions of Suruchi, and presents it to Dhruva. Okay, so I'll pause over here and see if there is any discussion.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. This pastime is very much applicable to our day-to-day life, actually. how we encounter so many things in our life, and how we have to, as you were giving the steps of anger, acknowledging the emotion, and then the next step is acceptance comes later, actually, and then learning. So now my question is, what is the we are tolerating some of these things in our life, somebody in our life, for example, and when we I'm forgetting the question now. I had that question when you were speaking, but now I'm forgetting it. Let me remember. There's somebody else to take over. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. No worries. We'll come back.
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Prabhuji.
Krishna Prabhu.
Go ahead, Prabhuji.
In a way, Suruchi, whatever she says could apparently be harsh, but at the end of the day, it's for the good and or what we can for the success of Dhruva at the end of the day. And maybe if this was not that harsh, all this would not have happened. Like to really pull him out of this situation, and now his mother also is helping now to not only see the bad part of it, but look at the good part of it. Because sometimes we tend to focus on only what somebody is saying. Because let's say, you're doing a job, like Prabhu is saying on our day-to-day life. You are doing a job, but you are maybe more qualified or you have more ability. But then sometimes you get at ease in that position. You don't want to move. And then it's only sometime something terrible happened for you to really realize, and then you move on, or you get another job, in this case. Then you find yourself like really you had more ability rather than sitting there doing something less. But it's only through hardship sometimes that we know our real ability.
You're right. I agree with you, Prabhu, that sometimes things that may seem to be signs of misfortune turn out to be signs of good fortune, and vice versa. Sometimes we see that empirically, that sometimes children are born in very opulent family, and then they grow up to be completely useless because they've never worked in their life, and they've enjoyed a lot of privilege without appreciating it, and they grow up mentally completely imbalanced or with a very demoniac mentality. So sometimes good fortune results in bad, and bad fortune results in good. And I think from this past time, what we are seeing is that it depends on if you're well situated. Like we see that Suniti is in so much of misfortune for no fault of hers, no apparent. It does not really say that why did Maharaj Uttanpa neglect her. That part is never really spoken, but the fact is that he was neglecting her for no fault of hers. She was young, she was beautiful, she had given him a heir, a son, she had excellent pedigree, and despite all that, she was being neglected by him. And she was properly situated. So she was able to use that misfortune to her own benefit in terms of giving the right instructions to the Lord.
Yes, Prabhu. I think also, let's say somebody is going through this type of situation, it all depends who is advising that person. If the advisor, or like in our case, it's a guru, a mentor, and if you don't get the good advice, you can ruin your life. Or if you get good advice, then you can really come out of the situation. I mean, unless that person himself is at the level of, goodness, and he can make, he can discern the situation and dissect. But most probably we are not at that level. But I think what I can see here, the person who's advising is critical.
Yes, and that's why the acharyas, they comment on the fact that Suniti is doing everything that she's asking Dhruva to do. So she's saying, Dhruva, don't worry about your misfortune, just consider it to be your own destiny. And then she herself is accepting that I'm being mistreated by my husband, it's my destiny. And she tells Dhruva that don't think bad about your stepmother. And then she demonstrates that herself. She does not say anything negative about her co-wife, does not say anything negative about Uttanpad. So that's what makes her qualified as a guru. The prachar and the achar, they are in sync with one another. Right? And the fact that she's speaking shastrically, that of course is the baseline. One person may be giving bad advice and acting in a bad way and say that my prachar and achar are lined up. But here we see that whatever she's speaking is from the scriptures. She's talking about the law of karma. She's talking about the importance of forbearance. All these are shastric injunctions. She's acting upon it herself, and then on that platform, she's advising Dhruva to act. So a properly situated guru, as you were saying, very important. And the test that is given to us, as we say that, how do we make sure that we are under the shelter of a properly situated guru? The fact that the achar and the prachar line up. Srila Prabhupada would say that all the time. There are people who speak all kinds of things and do different things. In public, they'll speak all kinds of things and do different things. Right? But he demonstrated in his own life, and then he would say that's the quality of a guru. So that what he says is what he acts, and what he acts is from the scriptures. They all line up.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Actually, I am echoing with Sarang Prabhu's comment, Prabhuji, because Suniti initially, her comments, even I felt harsh, like she was saying that, there is a problem with your birth itself, kind of. That is pretty much a hopeless situation. But she did not stop there, and she gave him the real hope. She has not just vented her lamentation and left him there, kind of, but she take him through with her, and because she was also going through similar pain process of neglect and all, and she took her with him and finally left towards God. So that is so I was also thinking that. And Prabhuji, you mentioned that Uttanpad being lusty. So here lusty means is it his fear of losing the attachment of Suruchi? Because it might not seems like gross lust because kids are there and he's in a open courtroom kind of. So is it that attachment made him, that is referred here as lust, Prabhuji?
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's move on to verse 20. Yasangari padmam paricharya vishwa vibhavanaya guna vipate ajo adhishtad khalu parmesthyam padam jitatma swasana vivandayam. Suniti continued, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is so great that simply by worshipping his lotus feet, your great-grandfather, Lord Brahma, acquired the necessary qualifications to create this universe. Although he is unborn and is the chief of all living creatures, he is situated in that exalted post because of the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whom even great yogis worship by controlling his mind and regulating, by controlling the mind and regulating the life airs, pran. So in 4 verses, Suniti will give specific instructions to Dhruva to go and worship the Supreme Lord. So Dhruva might say that Surichi asked me to worship the personality of Godhead so that I can give up my body and enter into her womb. So why should I follow her instructions? Because I have no desire to, Vishnu Chakravarti says that Dhruva is saying, I have no desires to enter the womb of the wild woman Suruchi. So Suniti is assuring Dhruva that that's not going to happen. Nor will he get a person like Uttanpad as his father. So then Dhruva said, then why should I worship Lord Vishnu? Just because Suruchi has said, you're asking me to worship Lord Vishnu? Suniti is saying that it is not just because Suruchi is saying that you should worship Lord Vishnu, but factually speaking, Lord Vishnu is the greatest. And then she's substantiating it with, at least in case of Dhruva, empirical examples. So this is things that Dhruva, even as a 5-year-old child, knew. So Dhruva knew that his great-grandfather Brahma is the greatest personality in the universe. So he knew about the greatness of Brahma. That's why he asked for a position greater than Brahma. So she is saying that this person that you know to be great, Brahma, how do you think he became great? He became great because he worshipped Vishnu. Padam jitatma swasan abhivandayam. That that his lotus feet are worshipped by those who have conquered their minds and breathing. Slightly different translations for this by Prabhupada and Vishwanath Chakravarti. Vishwanath Chakravarti says that this phrase, Padam Jitatva Swashan Abhivandayam, points to those who worship Brahma. And Srila Prabhupada says that this points to those who worship Lord Vishnu. So Suniti is again in the mood of an expert preacher. She is giving Dhruva an empirical example that he can understand. So he's a prince. He knows all about royalty and kingdom and ruling. He knows his father is the emperor. He knows Vaibhava is the emperor of the universe. He knows his position of Brahma. So instead of describing the greatness of Lord Vishnu in abstract terms, she is describing it in terms that can be understood by Dhruva. Prabhupada says Suniti cited the example of Brahma, who was Dhruva Maharaj's great-grandfather. Although Brahma is also a living being, by his penance and austerity, he acquired the exalted position of the creator of the universe. So Suniti is doing 2 things over here. Firstly, she is assuring Dhruva that by worshipping the Supreme Lord, he is not going to get something as trivial as being born in the womb of Suruchi. And she's inspiring him with the example of the greatest personality that he knows. That look, this is what happens. That Brahma worshipped Lord Vishnu and he got this position of being the creator of the universe. That is how great Lord Vishnu is. Okay, next verse. Tatha manurvo bhagavan pitamo yamekamatya purudakshaner makhe istva vipeda durvapamanyato bhaumam sukham divyam atha pavargayam. Suniti informed her son, your grandfather, Swayambhavu Manu, executed great sacrifices with distribution of charity, and thereby with unflinching faith and devotion, he worshipped and satisfied the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By acting in such a way, he achieved the greatest success in material happiness and afterwards achieved liberation, which is impossible to obtain by worshipping the demigods. So previous verse, she said that Brahma attained great opulence of power and fame by the worship of Lord Vishnu. So Dhruva might say, yeah, but Brahma is Brahma. He's everybody knows he's out there. And then Suniti comes down one level. And she says, okay, Brahma is Brahma, but your grandfather, Swayambhavu Manu, he also achieved all this opulence only by the worship of Lord Vishnu. So not only did he worship this, she says that by acting in this way, he achieved the greatest success in material happiness and afterwards achieved liberation. So, Bhaumam Sukham Divyatha Apabragyam. Bhaumam Sukham is that he experienced happiness in this material world. Bhaumam Sukham, three kinds of happiness. That he was the emperor of the universe. Then Divya Sukha, he attained heavenly happiness. And third happiness is Moksha Sukha. That after that he went to Vaikuntha. So she's adding another exalted advantage of worshipping of Vishnu. That not only will you enjoy over here, but you will also enjoy after you give up your body by Moksha Sukha. That by being elevated to the spiritual planets. Now, at the time when this conversation was happening, Swayambhavu Manu was obviously alive, because we know that many thousands of years later on, when Dhruva has this battle with the Yakshas, then Swayambhavu Manu personally comes and stops Dhruva. Please don't fight. Right? So at this time, Dhruva is a 5-year-old child, and Swayambhavu Manu is obviously alive. So one can understand that Suniti is making this statement either based on what the scriptures say, because the scriptures also speak about the future. So the scriptures predict that the Manu at the end of his life will get liberated, or she's speaking it as a foregone conclusion. Right? That, like if some student is studying very hard, then the teacher says, yeah, he's going to top, because he is already, he's confident, she's confident that he has prepared well and he has all the necessary characteristics. So Suniti is seeing the life of Swayambhavu Manu, is confident that he will apavargyam, that he will get liberation. So one of the two ways, that either she is speaking based on the scriptures that talk about previous Manus, and she's extrapolating it to the current Manu, or the scriptures speak about the predictions of the current Manu, or she's speaking of it as a foregone conclusion. But the important thing is that she's placing it as another advantage. That Dhruva, it's not just that by worshipping Lord Vishnu, you will take birth in the womb of Suruchi, but you will get something much more exalted. 3 kinds of happiness, right? She says Bhaum Sukh, Divya Sukh, and Moksha Sukh. All 3 kinds of happiness will accrue to you. Prabhupada says that It is specially stressed here that the opulence of Manu was due to his undeviating faithfulness to the transcendental service of the Lord. Manu diverts his mind to worship many demigods. To obtain material happiness is considered bereft of intelligence. If anyone wants even material happiness, he can worship the Supreme Lord without deviation. And persons who are desirous of liberation can also worship the Supreme Lord and achieve the material gifts. This verse comes earlier on in the Bhagavatam, that whether you desire, whether you're mokshakami or arthakami, any desire you approach the Lord, they will be fulfilled. Okay. So I'll do a couple of more verses and after that we'll pause. Tameva vatsrajya bhrutya vatsalam mumukshibir mrigya patab japadditim ananya bhave nija dharma bhavite manasya vasthapya bhajasva purusham. My dear boy, you should take the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is very kind to his devotees. Persons seeking liberation from the cycle of birth and death always take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord in devotional service. Becoming purified by executing your allotted occupation, just situate the Supreme Personality of Godhead in your heart and without deviating for a moment, engage always in his service. So, Suniti says, Tameva. Tameva means you also. So, just like Brahma and just like Sambhavanu, Tameva, you also take shelter of Lord Vishnu. As opposed to, she's saying, don't take shelter of me. Because Dhruva came, initially he was trying to take shelter of his father. When his father rejected him, he came running to Suniti to take shelter of Suniti. And Suniti is saying these are all temporary shelters. They're all fallible shelters. But real shelter is the ones that have been taken by the Mahajans, by the great personalities, Brahma and Manu. Just like them, you also take shelter of Lord Vishnu. And then she is glorifying the Prayojan because Dhruva is a child, and as a child, he's interested in what will this get me, the Vifam principle. What is it in for me? So even when you're preaching, in the early stages of preaching, one preaches more about what one will get out of it. Right? When somebody is preaching to somebody very, very new, so you'll get a lot of happiness and peace of mind. You will not be so much troubled by all these things that are happening around you. That's the prayojan. Right? You don't go directly to the person and say that, don't take to Krishna consciousness, get up 4 o'clock in the morning and chant 16 rounds and don't eat outside and fast twice in a month. The person will say that, I don't think so. But when you put a more and truthfully, because the prayojan is, it's not that she's lying. So similarly, when you say truthfully, if you practice Krishna consciousness, you will experience peace and have inner happiness, etc. And the person gets interested. And then he says, okay, what do I need to do? Right? And then the person gets more and more convinced to do it. Suniti is doing the same thing, right? So what she's doing is now she's placing the prayojan in front of Dhruva. So she says the Lord is Bhritya Vatsalam, that he has more affection for him, Dhruva. So he says the Lord has more affection for you than millions of mothers like me. So she uses the word Vatsa. So Vatsa is calf. And said that the affection of a cow for her calf is very, very deep. Unfortunately, in the current day and age, we see how as soon as the calf is born, the calf is taken away from the mother, at least when they are in these slaughterhouses. And then it's very pitiful to see how the mother cow laments on and on and on for such a long time. Laments. I remember as a child, we used to go and get milk from a small dairy that they had cows. And even at that time, even though they did not kill the calf, what they would do is that when the calf was born, if it was a male calf, it was a bull, then they would take the calf away and tie the calf outside the place. They would essentially basically let it starve to death. And the calf would continuously keep bleating, and every time the calf would say, the mother would respond. And when the mother would respond, the calf would respond. So it used to be really heartbreaking. We used to say, don't do this. And they would say, what can we do? We don't have the facilities to keep so many calves. So they would only keep the female calves. So here we see that Suniti is saying, Bhrityavatsam, just like the mother cow has affection for a calf, the Lord has affection. More than millions of mothers, the Lord has affection. And Ashraya, he said that he will give you shelter. So for Dhruva, she says, you will not encounter a trace of suffering. I cannot give you any shelter. Your father refuses to give you any shelter, but the Lord will give you Ashraya. Then Mokshabhi Mrigya, that other great personalities desiring liberation also strive to take his shelter, which is not easily attained. So she's saying that I'm not making this up. This is validated by the activities of other great personalities. And then she says, Nij Dharma Bhavite, that this is not an imposition. Nij Dharma Bhavite means that this is your original constitutional position. And also implies that she also means that Nij Dharma Bhavite means that while being situated in your Kshatriya Dharma. And Vishwanath Chakravarti comments on this, saying that this is the secret of mature practice of spirituality, that one practices Krishna consciousness while situated in his own position. So Nij Dharma Bhavite means that, does not mean that to become a devotee you have to give up your position as a grahastha, as a son, as a husband, as a father, as a citizen. So Nij Dharma Bhavite, that while staying in that position, you can execute Krishna consciousness. And then she says that great personalities have taken advantage of it. So Kunti Devi, non-stop problems. And what did she do? She used it to increase her affection for the Lord. Prahlad Maharaj, non-stop tormented by his demoniac father, used it to increase his meditation on Nrsimhadev. Parishad Maharaj, cursed by Shringi. Vidur, kicked out by Duryodhan. Avanti Brahman, rejected by his friends and family. Pingala, prostitute neglected by the customers. Chitraketu, cursed by Parvati. All these people, they took the blessings of the adverse circumstances to be situated more and more in Krishna consciousness. Right? So this is the prayojan, she states. Then she briefly gives the abhiday. She says Ananya Bhave. Ananya Bhave means with exclusive attachment. Previously also she had said that your grandfather Manu, he did not get this by worshipping any demigods. So she is already steering Dhruva away from Devas. Here again she says Ananya Bhave, that with attachment to nothing else, not to me, not to your father, not to the demigods, only to Krishna. Then Manase Avasthapya Bhajasva, placing your mind in the devotional service of the Lord. So we see over here that even though Suniti is offering a material benefit as a goal to Dhruva, what she is recommending is pure devotional service. Because all this that you see, Ananya Bhave, Manasya, Avastapaya, Bhajasva, these are processes to execute Shuddha Bhakti. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that considering the age of Dhruva, Suniti is not recommending anything else. So she's not recommending Karma Kand because it would be difficult for him to perform. And essentially what she's saying akama sarva kamova, that whether you have no desires or self or full of desires, you should surrender to Krishna. So Prabhupada in the purport says that Suniti said that you came to me crying, having been insulted by your stepmother, but I am unable to do any good for you. But Krishna is so kind to his devotees that if you go to him, then the combined kindness of millions of mothers like me will be surpassed by his affection and tender dealings. When everyone else fails to mitigate one's misery, Krishna is able to help the devotees. Later on, he said, Queen Suniti also indicated by instruction that Dhruva Maharaj was only a small child, 5-year-old, and it was not possible for him to purify himself by the way of Karma Kand. But by the process of Bhakti Yoga, even a child less than 5 years old or anyone of any age can be purified. That's the special significance of Bhakti Yoga. Okay, so I'll pause over here. I realize I'm a little bit over time, but if there's any discussion, we can spend a few minutes.
Can I ask the question now? I kind of remember now.
Please go ahead.
Regarding the tolerance, that Suniti exhibited such a tolerance, even after being neglected by King Uttanapada and also hearing the harsh words, she was still very tolerant. And nowadays we see that is very much lacking in a married couple. You know, when we see some of our friends who go through this, and we would like to help them and coach them or something. How can we use this as an example? Is it possible to advise such a person tolerate? Because obviously, depending on the abuse or depending on whatever they're going through, but we see that in cases of not extreme abuse, but just regular, whatever it is. But what I'm trying to say is nowadays, the abuse has been defined in a very small things. There are different types of abuse: physical abuse, verbal abuse, abuse of neglecting, so many different things. So by defining the abuse like this, the tolerance level is going down and down and down. So that is, so in this case, how can we take this as an example to give someone some hope or some direction? Do you have any thoughts on that, Prabhu?
Thank you, Prabhu. It's actually a fairly, as you had said, it's fairly prevalent, and there's obviously a lot that can be said about this, but at least from this past time, the philosophical understanding of one's position helps a lot. So many times in these situations, asking the person to reverse the perspective is difficult. So let's assume a wife is suffering verbal abuse from the husband. So simply telling the wife that accept this as your own destiny, it's difficult. But bringing Krishna into their life will give the same result. So not by your saying, but by their realizing, which is much more potent. Prabhupada often makes this point that the cause of dissent between husband and wife is each one thinks that the other is for their enjoyment. That's why there is dissent. But if both of them together serve Krishna, then that dissent will become harmony. That if both of them are united in serving. And it's a very powerful statement. We can, I have experienced this personally in my own life, that there are times when we have our Guru Maharaj coming and live with us, and both of us are from morning to evening, we are busy in serving him. Right, so we have very little time to argue with each other. And we, of course, when he goes, we start arguing again. But while he is there, because it's the service is externalized. That, you know, my mood is that, you know, how can I help my wife serve him, and her mood is how can she help me serve him. So we are not thinking that much about ourselves. So it's something that you know, that is very experiential. And if you can stay on to that, you know, Guru Maharaj comes and stays for a few days, Krishna is there forever. So the husband and wife are serving the deities, serving the devotees. Serving devotees is a very powerful way to I've seen that myself in congregation, that couples who had disagreements, whether purposefully or accidentally, they began to serve devotees. Either they either they started something in their house, or they started some effort to serve, and complete change in the mood there. So practically speaking, of course, here we are speaking about very exalted personalities where instructions are effective. But generally speaking, when a person is suffering, then the instructions have to be kind of, because nobody likes being told. So the instructions have to be kind of covered. And once they begin to enjoy the covering, then the instruction manifests themselves. So it's a very long topic, but thank you for asking it.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll stop here. Once again, I want to wish all of you happy Radhashtami. Vanchakalpatarubhayasya kripasindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Happy Radha.
Hari Om.